How do you describe it?
Right. Well, I agree. And politics is the mechanism, the social mechanism that we have to manage difficult trade-offs between the common good and the interests of groups and sectors and regions, between winners and losers, over difficult economic policy choices. And I think it's relevant to what we've been talking about over the last few days to note that over the last 40 years, our societies, in particular the societies in the OECD, the developed societies, have faced a massive challenge dealing with a trade-off between, or a trade-off that involves, on the one hand, globalization, international economic integration, which has led to extraordinary achievements, lifting 2 billion people in Asia out of absolute poverty, creating a great deal of prosperity around the world, but that has also caused a lot of difficulties, economic distress, harm to regions, industries, groups in all of our major societies. And I think I would say, perhaps exaggerating a bit, that most of our societies have largely failed at managing that trade-off. Our political systems do not seem to have effectively addressed the concerns of those who have not been benefiting as much from globalization, the left behind, those who have found that while per capita income may have doubled in the US over the last 40 years, the real median household income has risen about 30%. So the benefits of globalization have not been equally distributed, and the costs of globalization have fallen on groups that have, in some sense, used the political system to express their dissent with the existing consensus and their feeling that things should go in a different direction. And I think that is, in a sense, the story of the last 15 years of a backlash against globalization, that our political systems have not done well at managing that particular trade-off.
Can I ask you, is it a failure of globalization or unchecked capitalism?
I think it's a failure of our political systems. I think that whatever happens in the economic environment is something that has to be agreed upon by at least the majority of the population. And if what's happening economically is not acceptable to the local national population, there will be a political response. And let me say something very much along these lines. Most of the discussions that have taken place here in the political realm have been about interstate interrelations, about relations among national governments. But lying behind that is the domestic politics of every nation state. Politicians have to respond to their constituents, or else they're no longer politicians, or at least no longer in office. And so if it weren't for the fact that national political systems have been bubbling up with discontent, that national party systems are in crisis almost everywhere in the OECD, that national politicians find themselves beset by demands they have a great deal of difficulty meeting. If it were not for that, we would not be confronting the interstate conflicts that we now see and the differences among nation states. So I think that the underlying issues that we face have to do with the extent to which national political systems can address the legitimate concerns of their citizens in a way that is both meaningful, legitimate, and economically productive. That's a challenge, and one that we have not, I think, fully addressed.
Danny, I want you to pick up on this point that what's happening domestically, politicians have to respond to their own constituents, is clearly affecting the interstate play. And the global order has not been perfect, but it is fraying at incredible speed. How do you approach that, but also how do you fix it if so much of it is domestic at the international stage?
I think we're obviously going through a time of tremendous volatility and change. And I think it's very important to kind of go a little bit back to the fundamentals here. And there's an interesting tension. On the one hand, we now have, I think, increasingly a better understanding and evidence that at the core of economic development, prosperity, also like national security, institutions play a crucially important role. I mean, if you just look at like 2 of the last 3 Nobel Prizes in economics were really given for this insight. And so that's a growing understanding how crucial institutions are historically and contemporary. And what we have figured out, and we may say, well, it took us a long time to figure this out, but here we are. Well, you need the rule of law, you need democratic governance, you need market economies, and then you need like institutions that advance science and knowledge, like universities and related institutions. And if you have these things, then amazing things can happen, because the dramatic growth in lifetime income, in life expectancy, is a recent historical phenomenon, 200, 250 years old. Before that, we didn't have it. And it was that combination that triggered this. I think that's our current understanding. Now, there are 2 points to that. One, that is not obvious. So it took humanity thousands of years to figure out that's what we need. We need the combination of these things to really trigger exponential economic growth and prosperity, and the participation of that. And then on the other hand, now we have a dramatic decrease in trust in every one of the institutions that I've just mentioned. So for those of you that have followed the Edelman Trust Barometer that comes up every year, it's like every year it's bad news, right? And like you see the decline in trust in the key institutions there, they're all sliding down. And so on the one hand, we have a better understanding that's at the core. On the other hand, they're being eroded basically on a year-to-year basis. So my sense is whenever we are thinking about policy solutions or kind of global structures, it's super critical that we do not forget how absolutely essential these key pillars, the key institutional pillars are. And as leaders that play a role in that, whether we're business leaders or governmental leaders, or in my case, leaders of university, I think we have a responsibility first and foremost to strengthen them and to remind people of the centrality that these institutions play. So I think there's been a lot that has been missed. We have taken that for granted. We have basically forgotten really what the fabric is that's at the core of peace and prosperity, and it's absolutely critically important that we always keep this front and center.
But what Jeff was saying, and agreed, but Jeff was making the point that there are people who didn't benefit from these institutions. And by the way, I think some of these crises are quite Europe or Western dominated at this moment. We've had other challenges. I'm from the Middle East originally. There's other challenges in Africa, Latin America, and so forth. But if we take a moment, just for a moment in the West, how do you rebuild the trust in the institutions if people feel like, well, they never served me? I mean, this is not a narrative issue. It's a real-life delivery issue. I
think it's both. I think it is a real-life issue. I think, Jeff said it beautifully. Is like the key is that when you have growth in income and wealth, people need to participate. And in a democratic structure, that means a majority of people need to participate. Now, if you don't have that, you're going to get political tensions. Okay? But I think it is not to be underestimated how non-obvious the functioning of these institutions is. Let me just give you like my favorite example. Whenever we have a real policy failure, right, the immediate intuition that people has is to appoint a czar. Right? We have a drug czar, we have a this czar, we have a that czar. A czar is the most autocratic, one of the most autocratic institutions that we can think of. So it's very easy to forget about how these things work and how these operate, and to kind of move over, or we just need to have these kind of quasi-authoritarian structure and everything will be fixed. So you're right, they're real things. The question of participation in this kind of dramatic age of globalization and technological progress is crucial, but it is also important that with all the specific policy challenges that we have, that we do not forget what the core pillars are that have enabled the progress in the first place.
Arantxa, I want to turn to you. You, both hats, both looking at this on the global stage, and as a former foreign minister, you felt these tensions, but also then looking at domestic politics. So I want to ask you, what lessons have you learned? How do you approach this?
I'll give you 3 lessons that I've taken. Lesson number 1 is let's abandon the politics of inevitability. Things are not inevitable. They are the result of policy choices. If life expectancy in Europe is 82 and life expectancy in the US is 78, it's not by luck. If women employment in the US is 57% and in Europe is 71%, it's not by chance. If wealth accumulation on the 1%, top 1% in the US is 40% of the wealth, and in Europe is 25%, is not the result of luck. These are policy choices. And this is something that we have to go back to all the time, because policies of inevitability, think that globalization does not allow me to do this, does not allow me to do that, has disempowered people. And when you disempower people, you just generate rage. And rage is a very destructive force. And this is what we are seeing in a lot of our societies. Fiscal choices, education choices, regulatory choices matter. And they matter so much that this is what we have to talk to our citizens about. The second thing I've learned is that not everything can be explained by economics. That there is the other dimension of social, societal choices that we also make. That diverse societies, that empowered women, has also created frictions with power distribution within our societies. And this also needs to be treated. We cannot just simply say, oh, this is again inevitable. And the third lesson is obviously that power has also shifted internationally. It's shifted massively from west to east and also from north to south. And this new distribution of power has to find its accommodation in institutions, and I very much agree with you that institutions are essential, whether at home or internationally. This new distribution of power has to be also reflected in the manner in which we govern this collective space that we call international space, right? So these are my three lessons, but I want to go back to this point that we have the possibility to make choices and that we have to own those choices. And if we don't, then okay, good, it's revolutions, but we know where revolutions have taken us.
But choice is often not one direction.